Thank you, Father. How much time? 10 minutes?
10 minutes.
Okay, good. No, there's no clock up here or anything else. I did write out my presentation, but as I've listened this morning, I scrapped it. So, and I'm not sure my presentation has much to do with the topic either that is listed under my name or over my name. I wanted to just begin by talking a little bit about the church's commitment to the poor and health care. Social historians have often asked the question as to how did Christianity, this small Jewish sect founded by an itinerant preacher from Galilee, suddenly who was crucified as a criminal in the Roman Empire and under Roman law, suddenly explode across the world and become the dominant religion, at least in the Western world and parts of the Middle East as well, until the birth of Islam. They think it had something to do with plagues that periodically struck major cities in ancient times. And the fact that the pagans and pagan physicians and scientists at the time had no idea how to deal with these plagues, other than to evacuate entire towns and cities when these plagues came, because they were horrific events where thousands of people would die each day. So they left. The pagans left en masse into the hills, into the countryside, and they left the poor and the sick and the children who were afflicted by the plagues behind, mostly to die, because when they returned to these cities, most of those people had perished. This went on in ancient times until the arrival of Christianity. And in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, the Christians, who were largely persecuted at that time in Alexandria and Rome and elsewhere, when the plagues hit, they would come out and not leave the city, but begin ministering to the people who were left behind, taking care of the people who were left behind, serving them. And when the pagans returned to the cities, they found that many of these people who in previous times had perished now survived because of the care that the Christians provided. And the Christians, many of them died in the process of doing this, but many of them also survived, and many, of course, pagans, older, weaker, sicker, poor people survived. They think, in fact, there's an historical accounting of this, that this absolutely amazed the pagans. They said, these people are different. We have never seen anything like this before. And so we have to ask the question as to, this is what the early Christians were doing in what social historians call Christian communities of care. And it's the beginning of healthcare ministry in Christianity. But why were they doing it? And they were doing it, I think, as we heard from our earlier presentations, in imitation of Jesus, the founder, who they had observed and heard about, not in the 2nd century, any of them had observed it, but they certainly heard the very early stories repeated about who this person was, this Christ figure. This itinerant preacher in Galilee, who after he spent time in the desert and came out and was baptized, did not go to Jerusalem, did not go to Sepphoris, did not go to Caesarea Philippi. He went to Galilee and spent his entire ministry among the poor of Galilee. These were the least well-off people, and they were the people who were persecuted largely and enslaved in many ways economically by the more powerful people in the cities at that time and among the Romans and among the Greeks. But this is where he spent his time. There's a wonderful, wonderful book that I had the opportunity to read not long ago called Jesus in Historical Perspective. The Cardinal may know about it from his days at CDF. It's by a Spanish priest who teaches in a seminary, a Basque seminary. And it's of course written in prose, but it's poetic in terms of its representation of Christ. It is absolutely beautiful. And his third chapter, Jesus as the prophet of the reign of God, makes it very, very clear that in his ministry to the people of Galilee, the poorest of the poor, the most destitute, that his message was a fundamental message that things have now changed. I'm here to tell you that the reign of God has come. And I believe what that meant is that you may be oppressed, you may lack, you may be economically starved, but you have dignity as a human being because you are made in the image of God. And with the emergence of Christ and that message to the poorest of the poor, we had a radical redefinition of power in the world. Today we view power mostly, and they did at that time, as the guy with the sharpest elbows. Today it's the person with the biggest tank or the most destructive bomb. But Christ came and said, no, power is being redefined in terms of my ministry and my understanding in relationship with God. And that is, we are here to serve all those who are in need of us. And he spent his time among the poor, not because they're somehow better than the rest of us, not somehow because they're more inclined to be saved than the rest of us, but they're more in need of the message about human dignity. One of the benefits that I have of working in Catholic healthcare, and I've done so since 1980, it's been an absolutely wonderful opportunity for me, is I visit many of our ministries. Last year I had the opportunity to visit one of our long-term care facilities in, of all places, Seward, Alaska. Very few people know that Catholic healthcare provides 40% of the care in Alaska. It's a very big presence, largely because sisters went up there when people had nothing and started these institutions. Well, we were walking through an absolutely magnificent long-term care facility where they've designed it and set it up so that each person who's in that facility as a client has his or her own room that they take care of. They can decorate however they choose to. It's very personalized, and each person is accorded enormous respect. And then they can come into the common area. The rooms sit around a common area with a fireplace, a piano, a kitchen, etc., and they have a sense of community. Well, the assistant administrator, when we were walking through, the assistant administrator said, not too long ago, we received a phone call from another facility, and they said, we have a man here who is in a fetal position. We expect him to die very, very soon, but we can't keep him here. We can't afford to keep him in our institution because of the reimbursement. Would you take him? And they said, yeah, we'll take him. So they brought him over. They got him a room. The assistant administrator said, then I was walking through the common area 2 weeks later, and I didn't recognize one of the clients, this man sitting at a table trying to relearn how to read a newspaper. It was the man who was brought in the fetal position 2 weeks before, who was expected to die at any moment. But somehow, according that man a bit of dignity as a human being and showing him dignity and respect gave him a reason to continue to live. Another friend of mine in Catholic healthcare was telling me, he said one night, he said, I'm looking on a Saturday evening, as a very good Catholic, many Catholics do, for a quick Mass to get my Sunday obligation out of the way. I had my son. I said, we got to go to church, but we're going to make this very quick because we also have to get home. So he said, I wound up in church, and he said, turns out there are 2 baptisms and the first sermon by a newly ordained priest. This was not going to be an easy Sunday obligation to get out of the way. Well, the priest stood up, and the newly ordained priest had talked about his experience as a seminarian in a Catholic program taking care of the homeless. And he said, I was there one day, and they brought in from the street a man who was catatonic, who was completely filthy, disgusting in every outward appearance, hair matted, and saying nothing. And they took him. The first thing, of course, they did is they gave him a bath. And they started washing his hair and unmatting his hair. And as they were bathing him and taking care of him, the first words came out of his mouth. He turned to them and said, my name is Joseph. So I think when we talk about the poor, whether we're talking from one of our institutional ministries in the church, like Catholic Health Care, or Catholic Social Services, or Catholic Higher Education, or we're talking about individual witness, which is extremely compelling in terms of a very valid Christian pursuit of caring for the poor. We're talking about imitating those early Christians who in turn were imitating Jesus, in the sense that we go and take care of the poor because we recognize in them that they are made in the image of God and they have dignity just as each and every one of us do. And one of our roles is to make sure they understand that they have dignity and that they have worth and that they are saved. So thank you.